Hello everyone, welcome to another session of Karwaan Online History Festival Season 2. Today I am joined by a wonderful friend, India's youngest archaeologist and Egyptologist, Arsh Ali. Hi Arsh, welcome to the show. Can you
Thank
hear
you.
me?
Yes, I can.
So today we are going to discuss about a very fascinating topic, a rather very deep topic, that is the Purans, revisiting. So to begin with, I think Puranic literature includes lot many things. It includes cosmology, science, and genealogies of goddesses, kings, heroes, and demigods, folk tales, temples, medicine, astronomy, grammar, humor, theology, as well as philosophy, Hindu philosophy. So, according to, I think, the Brihadaranyaka Puran, it is referred to the fifth Ved. उपनिषद में लिखा है इतिहास पुराणम पंचमाम वेदनाम. So to begin with, Arsh, would you like to tell? I think there's a connection issue, and I think we have to restart the session. So we really apologize for this technical glitch. I think Arsh is back. Let me just check. Yeah,
Hello.
yeah. So I was telling that in. Can you hear me?
Sorry, there's some technical problem.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, so I was telling that in one of the Upanishad, the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, Puranas are referred as the fifth Ved. It is said that Itihasa Puranam Panchamam Vedanam. So to begin with, Arsh, why don't you tell us about the Purans? What are Purans basically, and what is
Eshan, the word Quran, it means, so in a sense, the Purans refer to the ancient contents from the Indian history. And as a text, it is very important to study the Quran because the Purans have an enchanting world of different contents that can be used by a historian for various works. It contains, a variety of ideas, list of kings, as well as contents related to the kingdoms that were present in Indian history during the ancient period. It has a lot of significance. And the Puranas are actually very much in number. But when we study the Puran, they are actually 18 that are there, mainly known as the Mahapuran. And the Mahapurans, so to speak, are those texts that are very much about the contents of religion, folklore, mythology, as well as a variety of different subjects. And if this technical glitch that's coming in between allows me to discuss the various topics of the Purans, it is mainly five in number that are known as the Panch Lakshan, or any of the 5 points that makes a Puran an authentic text to follow. So the Panch Lakshan, or the five elements, are Sark, that is cosmogony, that is how the universe was created, how the universe came into being, and the world at large. Then we come to the Pratisal, that is again with the advent of time, how other periods of time came into existence, and there were yugs that were happening. So we have to see the time that is being discussed in the Puranas. The Purans they speak about a continuous cycle of creation and then subsequent destruction. It is rather a continuous chain than just being a mere linear expansion of a starting and an ending. It talks about a continuous cycle. And after the Pratisar, we have three main interests that are there for a historian. That is the genealogies that we have of the rishis and the gods, and as well as the rulers and the kings who were ruling. They are known as the genealogies, or you have the list of the kings who ruled different parts of the country, and they were members of different dynasties. So, in that case, the remaining three of the five Panchalakshan of the Puranas are an important source for a historian who studies Indian history. So, we have the list that is very much important for a historian. There was a historian who was there in the 19th century. His name was F.E. Pargeter. And F.E. Pargeter was an Englishman who was very much interested in the Puranas. He wrote a monumental book which is known as The Dynasties of the Kali Yuga, or the Kal Age, wherein he tries to use the Puranas for reconstructing ancient Indian dynastic history. Because, as I have told you, the Puranas have the list of kings, and we have list of dynasties as prominent as the Mauryans, the Shungas, the Andhras. The other name for the Andhra dynasty is the Satavahan dynasty, which is much more prominent, as well as several other dynasties like Hanvas, etc. And it goes until the Gupta era. So what happens is that if we try to assess the historicity of the Puranas, we can generally keep it between the 4th century BC and the 5th century AD. So that's a huge span of time. And even in
Yeah.
some of the Puranas, such as in the Bhagavad Puran and another such Puran, we see that the extension of the written work is even going up till the 16th, 17th centuries. So we can see that it is very difficult to determine the layers in the Puranic text. It is absolutely a tedious job to differentiate between the various layers of the text and the times to which they belong. The Puranas themselves, all of the 18 as well as the others, they call Ved Vyas, as the compiler of the Puranic text. Now we know that Ved Vyas was the one who was the composer of the Mahabharata. So here we see that though the texts have ascertained Vyas as the traditional composer or the compiler of the Puranic text, it also underwent changes in subsequent periods. And this is something which has to be um, taken into deep consideration when we see the Puranas as a historical text for referring the political, social, economic, religious, as well as the scientific and the technological history of ancient India.
So, you mentioned Ved Vyas as the compiler of this, hagiographically credited as the compiler of this text, Puranas. But, the ancient tradition suggests that there was only one Puran originally. And, Vishnu Puran mentions that Vyas entrusted his Puran Samhita to his disciple, Lama Harshana, who in turn, imported it to his disciples, three of whom compiled their own Samhitas. So these three, together with Lamharsha, comprise the Mula Samhita, from which the later 18 Purans were derived. So I think it is important to see that it was not a work of one person, the Ved Vyas, and it is a collaborative efforts of many people during these centuries long time when it was edited and it was written. So how do you see it as a
Absolutely.
Yeah, how do you see it for the construction of the past? A material to reconstruct the past.
See, Ishan, the Puranas, as I have told you, they have a lot of reference about the dynasties. So, they have certain political contents, they have certain economic contents, they have certain religious contents, and we also have certain scientific and the technological contents. If you ask about the political reconstruction of ancient Indian history, it is very important because, as I have told you, the Panch Lakshans of a particular Puran, that is the Sarg, the Pratisarg, the Manavtar, or the aeons that we had in the Indian history, because the Puranas they divide the entire time period into four yugs, and it further subdivides each yug into the it compiles the yugas. Four yug we have the Satya yug, the Treta yug, the Dwapar yug, and then we have the Kali yug. So the Puranas say that each of these four yugs are compiled together to make a Mahayug, and hundred such Mahayugs they make a Kalp, and each kalp can be divided into 24 manavtar. So it is very much important for us to understand the extents or the measurements or the units of time measuring that the Puranas are keeping into consideration. Though it is sometimes an exaggeration because it speaks about certain kings ruling for thousands of years, which otherwise seems to be impossible. Uh, Reconstructing Indian history is not very easy from the Puranas because, in spite of the fact that the references appears to be very clear, two Puranas they clash on the question of either sometimes the number of kings that were there in a particular dynasty, or sometimes in the order of kings that were there in a particular dynasty. So the Puranas cannot be considered to be the sole source of reconstructing Indian history. We also have to consider other sources as well. That is to corroborate, because that is the task of a historian to do. We have to corroborate evidence that we have from the Puranas, and we have to mix and match it up with the archaeological as well as the epigraphical or other evidences that we can have from other varieties of sources. So, as a source of Indian history, the Puranas can be as a good starting point, in my opinion. And especially for the political part, it actually provides you a whole, a family tree of various dynasties. So that helps us in some way to form a general idea about the political situation of the country in the ancient times.
In the beginning, I was saying that the Puranas contain a lot of information on cosmology, the theology, and the Hindu philosophy, even science and technology. So, can you tell me something more about the primary contents of Purans? Can you elaborate on that?
See, the contents of the Puranas, as I told you, it all revolves around the Panch Lakshan. So the Pratisarg, the Sarg, the Manavtar, as well as we have the list of kings and rishis and gods. So, as per the traditional Indian cosmology, the kings of any particular dynasty, they so there two, three, or more than that of the dynasties. That is the Surya Vamsham, the Chandra Vamsham dynasties, and even today, many of the kings of various places all over India, especially in Rajasthan, if you go even in the Middle Ganga Valley, that is UP and Bihar, the former rulers who were ruling parts of the country during the British time and even before, they consider themselves to be members of either the Chandravanshan dynasty or the Suryavanshan dynasty. And the Puranas are very particular about naming the kings because as I've told you, they talk about the Panch Lakshan, and the historicity mainly rests upon the Vams and the the Vamsar that we have, that is the Charitam, the description of the dynasties that we have. So these two sections are very important for political reconstruction. It acts as a very good starting point. Coming to the other contents, we have other references of rituals, sacrifices, the fast that one devout Hindu should keep in the calendar as per the various days in the months. So it talks about certain fasts that one should keep in the Kartik month. There are certain fasts that one should keep during days of the solar calendar as per the lunar calendar. It talks about certain, Agnihotra or certain fire sacrifices that one should perform as per the whole solar calendar. And it also considers the lunar calendar a lot number of places. It talks about the pilgrimages, it talks about geography, it talks about how the various rivers came into existence, it even adds some of the mythological aspects, but most of the part in the geographical contents, it talks about how the earth is divided into several varshas, and Bharatvarsh is at the southernmost point of the entire celestial globe that is being divided by vertically into several spheres. It talks about the rivers, it talks about the mountains, the various places of pilgrimage for both the Vaishnavite as well as the Shaivite traditions. It talks about lot much about how ancient Indians actually had a world full of mysteries as well as full of anxieties and curiosities, places, cities. It provides you a very rich glimpse into ancient Indian political and social and as well as the physio-geographical the factors that are present. So it talks a lot about various contents, and you never know when a content related to religious entity ends and when suddenly something related to geography or history arrives, something related to medicine or science, it comes in the way. So it is a very random encyclopedic reference, so to speak, if you talk about the Puranas and the contents that we have.
About polity, and you mentioned science. Apart from the primary contents of the Purans, can you explain a little more on the science in the Purans? Because there's always a tussle between science and religion. Okay, or the text, the ancient text and religion and science. Can you tell us more about?
Uh, Ishan, as someone who studies the Puranas as a historical text as well as something that helps us to understand the scientific and the technological advancements during that particular time, we need to understand the historical background of the Puranas. Because, as I have told you, the Quran as a text has a very long span of time during which certain additions as well as certain reductions in the shloks or the passages happen. And during that time, there were changes, of course, happening in the polity. There were changes happening in the perspectives of economy, society, as well as religion. So, if we try to see the scientific contents of the Puranas, we have to first see how the Puranas have always been used by traditional historiography as a text only dealing with the political entities, such as the dynasties or the kings. But as I have told you, there is a very interesting side of the Puranas that contains very rich information about medicine, human medicine as well as animal medicine, veterinary sciences, astronomy, calendar making. It talks about architecture. It talks about reservoir making. It talks about farming. It talks about much more what a normal human being needs. It talks about what farmers need, and it also talks about what people who are cattle herders need. The knowledge that is very important for all these people, the Puranas have it. Because if you see the purpose of the Puran, The very purpose of the Quran is to provide information or knowledge to those people who cannot understand the philosophy or the knowledge in the Upanishads as well as in the Vedas. Because understanding the Vedant or the Vedic philosophy and the philosophy of the Upanishad is very difficult for most of the people. The Sanskrit that has been used in the Upanishads and the Vedas, though it appears to be very clear, has a lot of lexicographic um, problems because you need to be a Sanskritist some way to understand the text fully. But if you see the Quran, they are completely different. They provide, a sort of a reference to a layman who doesn't understand what exactly one needs to do in a particular problem. So it talks about veterinary sciences, and there are certain very interesting references that we have where we see that when a problem has been discussed regarding what one should do in a case when a mother cow is feeling anxious or feeling irritated from her calf. So the Puranas have given a very interesting remedy to solve the problem, and that is to take out the milk of that particular mother cow, add some salt to it, and give it to the cow itself to drink. And after some time, it says that it declares that the mother cow would again be engaged in taking care of the calf. So we should apply it in some way or the other experimentally in order to determine whether or not something like this really can happen. But in most of the cases where it talks about architecture, where it talks about ways of preserving dead bodies for dissections as well as for the cremation process, it talks about much more of that particular content. And this is very important to understand that merely looking at the text and understanding the Sanskrit or a first-hand knowledge is not important. We need to delve deeper into the Quranic details. We need to delve deeper into the experimental approach to the verification of the Quranic knowledge. Because unless and until something has not been experimentally verified, it is very much infeasible and suspectable to acceptance. So we have to do it, we should do it, and we have references of other places as well in medicine. We have, for instance, an reference in the Sushrut Samhita. So again, we are talking about how we are trying to corroborate sources in the Puranas with the sources from other texts. So we know about Sushrut, who is known as the father of Indian surgery or surgery as a whole. And he was a very famous physician who lived during the Gupta era. Now, during the time of Sushrut, he compiled a corpus related to surgery and medicine that is known as Sushrut Samhita. In the Sushrut Samhita, we have a reference where Sushrut is trying to teach to his students how to preserve the dead body. Because we know that during ancient times, it was a taboo to dissect human corpse. It was regarded as a disrespect towards the dead person for performing any dissection or autopsy on the dead body. But Sushrut had to teach his students the art of surgery, and for doing so, he required dead bodies. Now, it has been proven at certain times that since Sushrut lived in and around Kashi, that is modern day Varanasi, there is a lot of activity going on among the ghats. So in the ghats, the cremation is happening. Sometimes, even today, as we have the unidentified bodies of those people whose bodies haven't been named by any family member. So in that case, Sushrut used to steal the dead bodies, or even sometimes used to give certain amounts as tokens of appreciation to the gods, what we say as bribery. And then after taking hold of the dead bodies, We have reference in the Sushrut Samhita about how to preserve the dead body for keeping it integrate for the dissection to be performed. So, as per the setups or the procedure that has been told to us from the Sushrut Samhita, I am telling you the same in the same narrative. So, Sushrut says that take out the body from the place where it has been kept, clean it well, clean it with the cotton cloth, and after the body has been cleaned, you have to preserve the body in a special bark of a tree. Now we don't know which bark is he talking about because it can also be susceptible to certain facts that he wanted to keep that particular information with his students only. He didn't want to reveal that information. Otherwise, that would not have been a monopoly for him. But he talks about how to preserve the body in a bark or a wooden, an empty cavity of a wooden trunk from a tree. It can also be possible that he is referring to a trunk. And after keeping the body in the bark, Sushrut says that you have a very big cage, and the mesh of the cage should be minute so that no organism can enter the, or no fish can enter the cage easily. You keep the body in the cage, and then along the place where the river is flowing and where nobody can see, you dip or you throw in the cage into the river and let the currents of the water, the cold current of the Ganges, let it keep the body in a position of refrigeration. So he uses the cold waters, the cold currents of the Ganges to preserve the body. Likewise, we do in modern day refrigeration. And he says that the body should be kept for 7 days likewise. And since the mesh is minute, the gaps between the mesh is very small, no fish can enter easily to have a taste of the dead person, the dead body. After the 7 days up, you take out the body, the cage, and you apply certain oils using a brush of hair, bamboo, and rope. And you clean the body, you anoint the whole body with that oil. And then he says that after you do this, the inner and the outer organs of the body, they become very much easy for anyone to morphologically distinguish because he's trying to make the body little translucent, little bit visible to his pupils, to his students to see and analyze and identify the organs of the body. So he makes the body very much thinner, and due to the thinness of the body, the organs, they are at the same size, so they become prominent, and you can easily make out the organs without doing any dissection from outside. So such technological advancement that we can read about in the Sushrut Samhita is very amazing. And Ishan, as someone who studies Sanskrit, as someone who studies the Sanskrit text, it is a work very important for us to look about the same detail from other texts. So, 6 months ago, I had an interview in Doordarshan, and it was a Sanskrit program only. The name was Varta Gali. And there are people who are Sanskritists, they are people who are very well versed in Sanskrit. And one of the anchors who was to take my interview later on, when he came to know about that, I am an Egyptologist and I work in Egyptology, I work with mummies. And as soon as he heard this, he asked me a question that have you studied anything related to it from the Ramayana? I said no. And then he told me about a shlok that is there in the Ramayana. And he gives me the reference of the shlok as well as the shlok itself. And as soon as I read the shlok I heard from him, I understood how scientific Sanskrit as a language is. In such a short number of words, it describes much more. And that was the work of Panini, the grammarian, who invented and discovered and in some way re-advanced the rules of Sanskrit grammar. and we know that the Ramayana is the first epic in Sanskrit. It is the first epic that we have, the Itihasa. And as a first kavya, the Ramayana is a transitory text between the Vedic age and what we say as the post-Vedic age. And it provides us a very rich glimpse. Though there were extensions that happened to the text, it got expanded later on. From merely having 6,600 shlokas, it was expanded to 12,000. And then after that, 24,000 shlokas. But we have a lot of information. So if you allow me, I can tell you the shlok as well as the meaning of that shlok. So
Sure.
in the Ayodhya Kand, that is the second book of the Ramayana, we have the shlok which says, Tel Dronayam Tada Matya Samvesh Jagati Patin. The beauty of the shlok is that in this 5 to 6 words, it tells us the entire procedure of embalming that was happening to the dead bodies in ancient times. Now, before discussing the meaning of the shlok, let me tell you what the epic says about the context of the shlok. The context was that Sri Ram and Lakshman and Sita, they were sent to exile in the forest. And the remaining two sons of Raja Dashrath or King Dashrath, that is Bharat and Shatrughan, they were in Kakhe Pradesh. Now, Kakhe Pradesh was the maternal home of the remaining two sons of Bharat. So they were in their maternal home. Now, taking advantage of the fact that Bharat was absent and Shatrughan was absent, the mother of Bharat, that is Kakhe, she took the advancement and she reminded Dashrath of an oath or a vow or a promise that Dashrath was to fulfill for Kakhe. Because some years ago, Kakhe saved Dashrath during a battle. And since she saved his life, Dashrath promised that whenever you ask for a vow or a promise, I will definitely fulfill it. But then Kakya stops him and she says that I would tell you about this at a suitable time. So Kakya realizes that the time is at the full when Bharat is absent from the kingdom and she wants Bharat, her son, to ascend the throne after Dashrath. So, due to the foul play of Kake and Manthara, that she was a maid in the royal harem, Sri Ram and Lakshman, as well as with Sri Ram's wife Sita, they were sent to exile in the forest. Now, due to the fact that none of the sons were present, King Dashrath he died. Of course, it is very much feasible that he died due to an heart attack or the sadness or the gloom that took over him when none of his sons were present with him. And even the text says that it was because of a curse from the parents of Shravan Kumar, who was killed some years back when Dashrath was hunting in the forest, and he killed him accidentally. So we have reasons about what happened and why it happened and when it happened, and we have the reasons being given in the text about it. Now, when the body was, King Dashrath dies, and the body is now for no one to cremate, because as per the tradition, only the son, any of the sons, and in some cases only the Jesh Putra or the eldest son has to perform the cremation. Now, since only the eldest son has to perform the cremation, we don't have any sons with Dashrath during that time. So till that time, it is stated in the Ayodhya Kand that the Rajguru of the court of Ayodhya, that is Rishi Vaishishta, he orders the ministers or the Amatya to keep the body of King Dashrath in a vessel filled with mustard oil. So if you go again to the shlok, it says, To tel dronyam tada amatya samvesh jagati patin. So tail refers to the tail or the oil. Dronyam it refers to a two-pointed vessel, very much similar to the eating vessel which modern day cattle use. Dro means two. So droni means something which is two-sided, two-edged, similar to a boat, similar to a ship. And tada matya, which means by the ministers. Samvesh Jagatipati. So the body of the king, that is Jagatpati, has to be kept or was kept by the ministers, that is Amatya, in a droni, a vessel filled with oil. And the oil is mustard oil. The same thing is asserted by the Ramayana. The same preservation of the body for cremation is there in the Puranas. Then the Puranas have stories of the epics in a concise form, in a sankshipt form. It tells the whole story in a miniature form. And there also it discusses about a boat being used for preserving the body of the king in oil. So very much similar that the or that a boat of wood was first lacquered to make it waterproof, and then the oil was kept, and then the body inside. So the even today we have pickles with us, and in the pickles we still use mustard oil. So that is even being used today for preserving. So very much it makes sense. And the Puranas say about it, the Ramayans they tell about it, as well as the Sushrut Samhita. It tells us about the body being preserved in a bark of a tree or the log of a tree. So it is connecting. And if we want to connect it with the archaeological perspective, it happened in India in the areas of Assam. So in modern day Assam, there was a kingdom, very powerful, the Ahoms. And the Ahoms are said to have came from Myanmar all the way from China through Myanmar and then into India, into Assam. Now, they also, since they came from China, we have a lot of linguistic similarities between the Ahoms and the Chinese, as well as the Myanmarese people, the Burmese people. The linguistic connections we have, the cultural connections we have, as well as some way the ethical, the genetic connections we can also determine. Now the Ahoms also had a same process because they didn't cremated their bodies in the earliest phases of their rule during the later medieval periods. They preserved the bodies in big tanks filled with oil. It is there in the histories of the Assamese accords that we have from the Ahom times. So they tell us about in detail about the Ahom funerary practices that was prevalent. So they tell that when a king would die, they would take out the organs from the body and they would keep the organs separate in a jar filled with oil. And at the same time, the cavity body was tied with stones, heavy stones, using ropes, and then the whole body was kept inside, submerged in a pond filled with oil and honey. And it was in a certain ratio. So we see that what reference we have from the Ramayana goes during the time of the Puranas, it continues during the Guptan times when we see the same reference in the Sushrut Samhita, and then it even continues during the early middle medieval period in the Ahom, Assam. So we see the relationship and the continuation. So what I'm trying to do is that as someone related to Egyptology, where I did a research 2 years ago on the experimental research on in Egyptian mummification, wherein I tried preserving my dead fish to study Egyptian mummification experimentally. I'm doing the same thing now on Indian mummification. So we have a fish, very sad to hear that she died some years ago in my aquarium. It was a natural death. I'm also an animal lover, didn't kill her. And then after that, she was washed, and after washing the body, the oil was there and the body was kept in the oil. So, the process is it's going now. And we have to ascertain it experimentally.
No, the session is going very interesting, and I think a historian once told me that when you are in the present, you cannot escape the past, and when you are studying about the past, you cannot escape the present. So what do you learn? What did you learn from the Puranas about governance, law, justice? While seeing the situations of present day.
Ishan, as someone who is both a student of history and certain languages as well as Egyptology, I believe that the Puranas have a lot of information on history and Sanskrit, which speaks about the different meters of chanting the Vedic hymns. It talks about the Gayatri Chant, as we say in Sanskrit, or the meter of uttering the Vedic chants. And it also talks about history and science, etc. It talks about medicine, it talks about agriculture. Like, for example, the Puranas declare that if you see a tree that is drying up, it needs manure. So what you do is that you take out the water from the pond, which is inhabited by fish, and you pour that water in that plant. And as soon as you pour that water on that plant or on that tree, it will act as a very nice natural chemical fertilizer. And the same thing even modern science say that the manure that is there from the fishes is utilized by the water plants, such as lotuses and water lilies. Even nowadays, I'm growing some lotus plants in my garden, and I can see that the fishes which are there in my pond, they're actually providing a very good manure to my lotus plants. So I can see the same thing, and at the same time, I can read the same stuff from the Puranas. Now, coming to the administration, it is very important to understand that for an ancient Indian scholar, Chanakya was one example. All of these scholars were very much, worried about the technological as well as the political situation of the country. We know from certain late plays, such as the Mudrakshasa, that was probably composed during the Guptan period, about the worries of Chanakya regarding the fate of India, because he was seeing India amidst a very great danger. Foreign invasions were at the doorstep. The king who was to represent the Indian people, that is the Magadhian Empire, so to speak, Dhananand, he was a king who was not interested in administering the people. Rather, he was interested more on dance and music and women. And at the same time, there were divisions in the country as well. Caste divisions, political divisions, cultural divisions. So, as a scholar of political polity as well as administration, what is known as Arthashastra, he was very much worried. And we see that even in the Puranas, that worry, the problem, the discussion of the problem, as well as the discussion of the solution, has been amply given in certain Puranas. Most of that information about administration and about the polity and the kingship comes from the Agni Purana. And there are certain scholars who say that Agni Purana is more like an encyclopedia rather than just being a Purana. Because instead of just concentrating along the Panch Lakshan or the 5 points of a Purana, it goes further towards medicine, towards agriculture, and as well as towards laws and administration. We can see that in the Purana, the king has been given exceedingly a large number of powers. And the king has been given duties as well. And since the Puranas are a text of religious importance, it is to be honored by any king. Because as per the Varn Vyavastha or the Varn system that we had in the ancient times, and that was somewhere very much rigid in subsequent periods, the Brahmins were at the top, followed by the Kshatriyas. And the Kshatriyas were the people responsible for kingship as well as for waging wars and protecting dharma or righteousness. So for the Kshatriyas, uh, outlining the duties as well as the rights of kings was very essential. And we see the same thing in the Arthashastra, we see the same thing in the Puranas, as well as several other texts like the Niti Shatakam. That is very much important text for any student of Sanskrit. So we have certain Niti Shastra in the Puranas, where the king has been given, there's a listing of duties of a king. For example, it is said that a king should never indulge himself or herself, himself into businesses of the private people. So the text say that though the king can engage in a business, it should not be as a common merchant. If he wants to trade and he wants to do some profits for his own interest, he has to do it as a king. Because the king is a king, he is a ruling figure. And there has to be certain social and political as well as economic integrity for a king. But at the same time, he has to ascertain the importance as well as the independence of guilds. So they were guilds of merchants that were there in the Indian history in ancient times, and the king has to respect the guilds as well as the rules of each guild. He has to respect the Brahmins, he has to respect the learned people, he has to respect the animals, he has to respect the dharma or righteousness, not speaking about any particular religion. The Puranas even say that the king has to respect other religious sects as well. And we have a very wonderful example of this from Ashoka, where we see that in his edicts, he talks about not only Shramans and Brahmins, that is the Buddhist monks and the Brahmanical priests, he also talks about the Ajavikas. He talks about the Nigranthas or the Jains, and he even talks about the Charvakas. So he talks about lot number of religious sects that were prevalent in different parts of the country. And we even have examples of kings like Krishna Dev Raya, Rajendra Chola, many other later kings who were also particular about maintaining a policy of tolerance towards other religious people of various religions, different sects that were prevalent in different parts of the country as well as in their kingdoms. And the Puranas are very particular about enumerating the army, how to make bombs, how to make the artillery. For example, the Puranas say that if you want to make a bomb, not an atom bomb, I'm so sorry to say, it's just a normal bomb which burns. It not talks about, as some people say, about atomic reactors and nuclear reactors. It's not that. They talk about normal inflammatory bombs. So they talk about how to make a ball of inflammatory materials consisting of things like cows, that clarified butter of the milk of the cow. It talks about adding dung of camels because it is thought that the dung of the camel it burns very well. It talks about adding other inflammatory materials like oils, even sometimes plant resins. And it says that you make small, small balls, and when an army attacks you, you set them on fire and you try to shoot them near the camp because the camp of the enemy has the store of grain, it has a store of weapons, it has store of other materials that the army of the opposing team, that is the enemy, would use. So you try to use these small shots for burning the tents. And when the
Yes.
tent or the camp is destroyed, the enemy camp is destroyed, so everything is okay then. So it talks about how you can use materials like camel's dung and certain herbs that burn well. It talks about even using sandalwood so that nobody can suspect the smell of something fishy burning. So sandalwood adds to the scent and it can go off unsuspectable to the enemy soldiers. So it is very much even telling us about how to make bombs. And I'm so sorry that those of the students who are hearing me, please don't try this at home. Don't make plans to make bombs and then have Diwalis and crackers in the classroom as the lockdown gets over. It just talks about how to use it in the army. And we have other very much wonderful information from the Puranas about the administration of the ministers. Because for any Arthashastri or someone related to polity and the study of law and governance, ministership is very important. And ministers and the organization of the ministries has been very much deeply dealt in Puranas, especially the Agni Purana. And that helps us to understand the political as well as the administrative setup or the framework that was prevalent in ancient India. from the 4th century BC to the 5th century AD. So it's a huge span of time that the Puranas are all about.
After this discussion on the Puranas, the primary contents of Puranas, or the knowledge that it have, now we our last segment. We are running out of time now. What can we learn from the Puranas and what we can imply in this modern world, in context of India, of course.
India as a country has a lot already to give to the world. It has already given a lot of things to the whole world ever since the time itself came into existence. I must enumerate in this particular time, in this period of our session, and to whoever people listening to us, the audience, India is a storehouse of knowledge. We have people from the freedom struggle, people from a range like of different ideologies, especially Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, V. Sarwakar, Mahatma Gandhi, as well as the first education minister of our country, Maulana Abdul Kalam Azad, and even people like Dada Bhai Nauroji, uh, Bhagat Singh, Subhash Chandra Bose. All these people understood very well that India as a country has a lot of potential, which it has already provided some of the factions to the world, and many much to give more in the future. India as a country, Ishan, I feel is not a country. It's not a nation state. It speaks about an idea. India is based on an idea. It's an idea itself. And the base of that idea, India, it rests upon knowledge. That is Vidya. And we know from the Shastra that anything that rests upon Vidya is immortal. It cannot be destroyed because knowledge is immortal. It is, it extends till from time immemorial. It is immortal. And India as a country is not a nation state. It is itself a book to understand. It is a huge encyclopedia of different fields of learning. It is a huge encyclopedia of different languages, different people, different religions, different cultures. And you cannot have a single lifetime to understand the whole thing. You need several lives to understand India as a country, as an idea. And India as a country, if we as the Indians, the millennials, the people of the 20th century, so to speak, the would-be Indians, the next India, if we try to understand that just looking merely towards the West is not the solution to every problem, because every problem has its own contents, it has its own context, and that context, it depends upon the situation and the place where the problem is. You cannot use a solution that is being used in the West, in Europe, or in the Americas to solve our problems related to that problem that we have in the West, but not exactly the same, because the country, the people, the context is different. The problem is with us, and the solution is also with us. That has already been left by our ancestors. If whatever points we have discussed, it was 4 or 5 in total about Sushrut and the mummification or the embalming of the body, how
About the
refrigeration in
politics.
the ancient times using the yes, how veterinary sciences like giving the cow its own milk with salt added so that the she can again start taking care of the calf, and things like using chemical natural manure from the water of the fish to make it, and also making bombs and discussing administration. You can actually have an idea that we have much more to understand from our own texts rather than just looking towards the West. As Voltaire, people must have heard about Voltaire. Voltaire is known as the father of modern European thought after Descartes. And he says very much clearly that I am absolutely clear that it was along the banks of the Ganges where language came, where culture came, where civilization came, where law came, where philosophy came. And he is asserting that he is not suspectable about the fact. So, if the father of modern Western philosophy, that is Voltaire, himself ascertains the importance of the Indian people and the contributions we made, why we as Indians should be somewhat suspectable or ashamed about accepting that. Accept it, but after scrutinizing it. Don't accept it blindfoldly. We have to use our brains. That is what our own Shastra tells us. That is, we know Lord Brahma. So he's shown with four heads, and each of the four heads represents the four elements of a person. That is Manas, Buddhi, Chit, and Ahamkar. So
Ji.
Ahamkar, which is some way, it's important to any person in a limited way. Manas is the mind, Buddhi is the intellect, Chit is how to connect things, and Ahamkar is using it well for your own as well as for others. So we have to use our Manas, we have to use our Chit, we have to use our Buddhi, as well as we have to ingrain certain elements from Ahamkar, that is the exact Sanskrit word, for making sure that India as a country emerges well. We have to make sure that a second green revolution happens, because the first green revolution happened, it came from the West. Let us start the second one from India itself. We
Yeah.
have the knowledge. We know organic farming thousands of years, ever since our country came into existence and our people went here and there. We have known organic farming. It's not a new idea for us to adopt it. We are still using the technology that is some way outdated for supporting an ever growing population in our country. And the best way is to make the best of the East and the West. We have to mingle up the best of the knowledge that comes from the East as well as from the West. That is where India acts. It acts as an entrepot. That is a fusion or a sangam of ideas. I'm from Allahabad, that is Prayag, and it is famous for Triveni Sangam. So the Ganges is not worshipped very much. The Yamuna is also not worshipped very much independently. But the Triveni Sangam is the place of moksha as per the Shastra. Because Sangam is an entity of another valley that is much more than the individual elements that are making that Sangam. So we understand that the spiritual, the practical, as well as the intellectual importance of Sangam is always more important. And India as a country and Indians as a people need to make India the Sangam of all the thoughts, all the schools, and all the languages, all the cultures of the world. We have to make ourselves an international people, which we, I think, are already in some way. We have to make it and move it further towards a better end.
That was a very beautiful message to the young minds. I think, we must use the rational brain, as you said, to scrutinize the past, implement the best of the past knowledge to make our. I think that summarizes what you said, and I think it was lovely talking to you this evening. It always is because I was, as you mentioned, the second green revolution. We were discussing it the other day when I was writing a book. So it is important to understand the past and to implement to make the future. So I think there are three questions in the chat. First is by Srijay. Question is, can you please demonstrate Vastus and its logic in the context of Puranas?
See, Vastu itself is a word that refers to logic. It is not like magic happening and people and characters from Harry Potter coming into your house as soon as you have certain setups. It's not like that. If we want or we wish to understand as well as to make the people from 3rd century, 2nd century BC understand modern science through the explanations that one student of science can undergo in a university. It's not possible. You have to make stories, you have to make certain myths, you have to form certain imaginative legends to make them understand. For example, if you want them to clean their own, their houses, you cannot just make them extreme. Even today, if you go to the village, some of the people are so much, ignored, or they are devoid of knowledge about anything, that they don't even bother caring about their houses and about the environment. So in that case, you expect more of using folklore and imaginative stories rather than just using modern science and explanation. If you want to make any child understand how the sun burns, you will not start understanding in nuclear reactions and fission and fusion to that small 4 or 5 year old kid. You have to form an explanation that sun, it burns without, because there's fire there. There are a lot of candles, and since they burn, the sun burns. So likewise, the same way, the Puranas also, they tell us about these things in a story form, in a legend form. The only thing is we have to use our mind, our chit, our buddhi for understanding that thing and taking out the keywords from the story, and not just understanding the whole bit line by line. As I've told you, first hand knowledge is not essential. We have to delve deeper into the details. So, Vastu as a concept is more about architecture. Now, today, many of the people are having problem of vitamin D deficiency. It is because they don't get ample of sunlight. Now, Vastu itself is based upon sunlight. It talks about that the entrance to a house should be towards the east or the northeast of direction. The garden should be towards the east of the direction of the whole plot of the house. It speaks about places where water pots or where kitchen should be, and it says that the kitchen should be towards the east or towards the northeast corner of the house, so that light may enter. And since sunlight has certain disinfectant properties, it may kill the bacteria or the microorganisms, or so to speak, the bad air that is there. So Vastu is all about logical architecture. Though we have lot number of elements that are very much flawed, that are very much plagued by superstition, taking out the useful elements from Vastu and using it, I think it's not a bad idea to do.
The using the rational brain. That's
Yes, using the buddhi, the chit.
so. Another question is by Diksha Chaudhary. Her question is, can you share how the religion moved from Indra to Surya, which are more prominent in Vedas, to Vishnu, Shiv, and Shakti later on?
Thank you so much, Diksha. The question is nice, very interesting. See, we have to understand that when the Aryans came into India, into the Indian subcontinent, now there are other stories about Aryan invasion, hua ki nahi, and there are a lot of
That's a
hypotheses.
whole debate.
Yeah, another debate. But I personally think that a migration would have happened if an invasion wouldn't. Invasion and migration are two different things. People coming with spears and swords is an invasion, but people coming as migrators, as migrants, is a migration. And there's always been migration in India. I think that the migration was not like 1 lakh, 2 lakh people coming together. It was very much gradual, and it was so much gradual that cannot even ascertain it using genetic studies, because there was a lot of interminglation happening among the local inhabitants as well as those who came into India. And even after the Aryans, if we ascertain that the Aryan migration theory was correct, there were other people also who came. So they were the Shakas, the Scythians, the Kushanas. We have people like the Greeks coming in, the Persians coming in, and even in the medieval times, there were the Turks and the Arabs and the Afghans coming into the subcontinent. So if people have always been moving into India, and India herself, the culture was influencing the invaders or the migrators more than the migrators influenced India. I think it was an assimilative process. Now, for example, if I can give you two, three main core evidence of whether or not the Aryans were people from outside or they were from India itself. The Aryan word itself comes from Iran. And Iran is a modern Persian word for ancient word which is Aryan. So Aryan comes from Aryan. All these words are intermingled. And Vedic Sanskrit is a member of the Indo-European language family that has always been ascertained by even the Oriental scholars such as Max Muller and Sir William Jones, as well as by other people who came subsequently. Because if you see linguistically, Vedic Sanskrit and Old Persian are almost the same. Even if you talk about an evidence that is very much scarcely talked about in India, it is the Bahishtan inscription in Iran. The Naqsh-e-Rustum is the modern name for the Bahishtan area that is near Persepolis. That is the ancient capital of the Persian Empire, the Achaemenid Empire. And in the Bahishtan inscription that was commissioned by Darius, I'm talking about 200 years before Ashoka, even before Alexander the Great. Before Alexander came, he conquered the Persians. So the Persians was the dominant power who were ruling places from Egypt to India. We have to understand world history, Eshan, because we cannot just chop everything into bits and pieces. We have to see the whole thing on the basis of world history. And world history was the subject of the topic I was studying at the first place. I was just in class 8 when I gave the advanced placement exams in world history. That is an American exam. So normally they gave it after 10, that is 11th and 12th for foreign admissions. I gave it in class 8. And it was like topping the world all around it, 4 out of 5. So you can understand the time when I've been reading and muddling with the questions that were coming. So in the Bahishtan inscription from the 5th century BC, that was commissioned by Darius the Great, we have Darius calling himself Aryan. He says, I am Daryavush, that is the Persian term for Darius, the Aryan, the Shahanshah of Persia and Media. So Persia and Media were the two places, very much like North India and South India. It is the north and the south of Iran, modern day Iran. So before you have to create a Persian empire, you first have to defeat the Medians. So he defeated them, and then after annexing the whole thing, he went on to other countries. So he says that I am Daryavush the Aryan. Even people related to the Nazi ideology, specifically Hitler, he tried to use the same historical evidence in a falsehood way. So it was like a flawed or a plagued use of history. But Aryan is more like a geographical reference. It's not a racial reference. It's not like talking about Aryans in Dravidian. No. It is talking about Aryan, that is the ancient name of Persia, in Persian language, ancient Old Avestan language, and talking about India. It's not talking about racial terms. It's talking about geographical terms. It is different. People tend to confuse it. I tend to distinguish it. So Darius is telling himself to be a Persian, that he was. And the name for Persia in Old Persian itself is Aryan. And even it makes sense because modern day Iran, when after the 1979 revolution that happened, they wanted to ascertain their own identity. And therefore, at this time when the Ayatollah Khomeini, who was the first supreme leader of Iran, when he came to the power, he chose Iran as the term because Iran was actually the ancient name of Persia. Persia is the name of Faris is Arabic, that is non-Persian, it came later on. Persia is a Greek term. So, it's all about languages. And even if you see the Brahmanical culture, we have the Upane and Sanskar. Even among the Parsis, the modern day Zoroastrians who are there in India and Iran, they still have a ceremony known as the Navjot or the entry, a new beginning. They also do the same thing, like applying that that cotton thread may of 3 strings or 6 strings, and tying both the boys as well as the girls after they attain the age of 7 or 8 or even sometimes 12, 13, to make them, to welcome them into the Zoroastrian faith. Linguistic similarities are like, word for matra, that is mother. In Sanskrit is matra. In Persian also is mater. In German is neuter. In English is mother. It's very important to understand that Aryan as a culture is a culture. Now coming to the gods, Indra, Varun, Agni, Mitra, Dasyu, all these gods were also worshipped in Persia before the coming of Zoroaster. Because if we tend to see the Aryan migration theory or the Aryan invasion theory, it says that people came around 1500 BC. That is much, much before the Persians or the Persian Empire. So we are talking about first millennium BCE, Persia. So there also the gods were worshipped before Zoroastrian faith was it came into being after the coming of Zoroaster, the prophet. And there he says that you should worship one god, that is Ahura Mazda. But before his coming, we had other gods being worshipped, and the same was even with the Aryans who came to India. So I think it is much more with the gods who came from outside and they intermingled with the local population in India. But by the time the historical process came into progress, other gods came into prominence like Vishnu and Shiva and Shakti. So because process of culture and philosophy had always or have always been happening in India. Even during the later times, we have Ganesha. In the coins of Antioch we have Krishna and Balram being represented. In the coins that was discovered in Al Khainum, that is in modern day Afghanistan. So their gods have always been coming into existence, and the older ones were preserved. New ones were also coming into existence, and stories were there formulated to make us understand the relationship.
For today's session. It was an enriching session and very interesting session, and it was so good to be in conversation with you after a long time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you everyone who joined us live this evening. Bye.
Bye.